Downloadable content on some Nintendo Switch games have always been a matter of patience. The Outer Worlds didn't get its first expansion on Nintendo's hybrid console for many months after release, but it wasn't until Doom Eternal that patience truly became a virtue. After all, the expansion that recently came to its Nintendo Switch version is a trial of patience in and of itself, something showcased during Nintendo's E3 2021 presentation. Here is my review of Doom Eternal's The Ancient Gods Part 1 for the Nintendo Switch. The story of this DLC takes place not long after the main campaign of Eternal. But newcomers to the game don't have to worry, I won't be putting any spoilers into this review, and subtitles will be off during any cutscenes that I show. After the main game, the Doomslayer seeks out the help of the Seraphim, an ancient ally first mentioned in Doom 2016 to find a way to destroy the demons once and for all. Along the way, the Slayer encounters and fights foes both new and old. Overall, the story of this DLC adds a lot to the lore of the series. While it does end on a pretty big cliffhanger, it has some more stability in tying the games together and sets up some pretty exciting events to transpire when we eventually get Part 2. When it comes to gameplay, not a whole lot has changed overall. The Ancient Gods Part 1 is an expansion you can access on the main menu like the main story campaign or multiplayer. It contains 3 lengthy missions that will challenge your skill as well as your patience. More on that later. So what did Ancient Gods bring to the table? As you may come to expect, new cosmetics have arrived. Simply buying the DLC gives you access to the white and gold Maker Slayer skin with a progress bar for unlocking more of the set as you play. On top of this, you can unlock other skins in the new campaign levels by finding and completing secret encounters. Continuing with customizations, support runes are also new. These let you add an extra buff to your rune loadout that the main campaign did not allow you to do. Unfortunately, these are pretty much the only collectibles you get in the new missions. Each level has loads of secret areas for you to find, but they're all filled with extra lives and ammo versus the figurines, albums, and cheat codes of the main story. Getting into combat, we don't really have any new enemies outside of the expansion's final boss, but we do have a new feature in the form of spirits. These are ghosts that can possess any enemy in the area. And when I say any enemy, I mean any. From simple enemies like the Imp and Cacodemon to the Cyber Demon inspired Tyrant, any non-boss enemy can be possessed and buffed. To add a little bit to the strategy of things, the spirit is released when that enemy is defeated, but only the microwave beam from the plasma rifle can kill it. So you have to quickly swap weapons and get rid of it before it jumps into another body and the entire process starts all over. This leaves us with the gameplay and difficulty of Ancient Gods to deal with. This expansion only contains 3 missions, but they're very long. Nearly every room of these large maps has waves of enemies for you to fight, and you will clock in hours upon hours to finish them. Each of the 3 took me well over 2 to 2.5 to clear my first try. Considering the fact that I'd already beaten the first 2 via the PlayStation 4 version, it's a pretty lengthy crusade. What makes this so long, however, are not the levels themselves. It is the difficulty and what you're fighting. Ancient Gods sets in stone from its first 20 minutes that if you haven't acclimated to Eternal's difficulty, you're in a world of hurt. And if you have adjusted to it, you're also in a world of hurt. id Software took the already high difficulty of the main campaign and ramped it up to an entirely new level. A lot of this difficulty has to do with the spirits and enemy placement. There are many brutal battles you have to contend with, like fighting 2 marauders at the same time, or just all of the battles with huge mobs of enemies in small and enclosed spaces. It's almost like playing a bunch of hardcore snap map levels from Doom 2016 that were made to test whether you could actually get through them. It was initially so difficult for everybody on other platforms that id Software eventually went back to rebalance and nerf a lot of the really hardcore stuff towards the end of this campaign. Speaking of that nerf, the Switch version is currently running post-patch, and while a lot of it can seem unnecessarily difficult with damage output, it is far more balanced now than it was. What I personally disliked about the campaign wasn't the difficulty, but the length of the battles. I mentioned this in my Doom Eternal review, but many waves of enemies feel unbearably long. This mostly happens in the first stage, the UAC Atlantica facility, but lots of battles have upward of half a dozen or more long waves of enemies before you can leave the room, and then the next room does the same thing. I really enjoy the gameplay of Eternal, and that's why I keep coming back every week to do events, but when I'm in the same room for almost half an hour or even more with just fighting wave after wave after wave, it gets repetitive and exhausting to not at least get to move around to a new area before the next onslaught happens. To many of you, this might not even be an issue, but I got to a lot of points where I thought, can I please just go to another room now? I've been in this room for 40 minutes. And that leads us to content and length. Ancient Gods Part 1 costs a whopping $20 on the eShop, just like on other platforms. But these 3 missions took me nearly 7 hours to clear, giving us a surprising amount of length for such a small number of missions. Finally, let's talk about visuals and performance. Doom Eternal got a patch that came with this DLC, so we need to look at how it changed the presentation. For starters, the entire game got a visual downgrade. Even in docked mode, everything looks blurrier than it did before, and that was likely to keep up with the performance demands of the mobs Ancient Gods 1 throws at us. Unfortunately, it didn't work as well as they might have hoped. The game still maintains a mostly steady 30 FPS, but it is no longer constant. Specifically in the expansion levels, the game will often dip into the mid to high 20 FPS range during certain animations and areas. As we bring all of this to a close, the Ancient Gods 1 is an exhilarating expansion that makes a difficult shooter even more difficult. Unfortunately, the graphical downgrades they made to the game didn't quite live up to the chaos that this expansion brings, and many of the room battles are exhaustingly long, feeling like they should have been divided up and balanced a little bit better. But even so, it proves to be a fun expansion that gives you that much more of a satisfying feeling when you clear these brutal missions and trek back into them with cheats enabled. Reviews to go rates Doom Eternal's The Ancient Gods Part 1 for the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.